that I have to hit every facility in this entire province over the next 2 years. So I was just in Port Simpson, Prince Rupert last week. The week before that I was in Penticton, Princeton. I've been in Haida, Hudson Hope, Prince George, been in St. Paul's and Royal Columbian, Port Hardy, all around the province to work collaboratively. And that's the message that we're going to get across today and as we go forward, is working collaboratively with the health authorities. I'll always say there's 3 parties that are involved in a transfer across our province and even out of our province. It's the sending site, it's a transport company, which is ourselves, and the receiving site. 3 of us working together to move patients across this province. So when I was in Port Simpson just recently, I learned a lot. I learned a lot wherever I go. This isn't about me going forward and telling people exactly what PTN does or PTCC. This is about listening to the needs of the communities. And again, in Prince Rupert, we have a helicopter station there, HeliJet, and learning that they're not flying enough as much as they should be. Learning areas out there that we're driving 3.5 hours to that we should be flying 20 minutes to. So we're going to make some changes based on the trips up to these places and listen to the concerns of those in those communities. So, patient transfer services. A lot of people when I go believe this is a PTN presentation, but it's patient transfer services. So I oversee both PTN, Patient Transfer Network, and PTCC, which is Patient Transfer Coordination Center, sometimes better known as Air Dispatch for Ambulance. And so first of all, we're going to talk about is that the power button? Is it the power button or is this the
green one? There you go.
Green is the down.
The big green one.
Big green.
There you go. There. Okay. So PTN, Patient Transfer Network. So when I first start this, and keep in mind this is to the health authorities across the province. This is the conversations we have with the physicians, nursing staff. And the first thing I ask, what is PTN? A lot of people, and I'll ask you, how many people realize that PTN is the organization that finds beds for our hospitals across our province? They're not. So one of the things I do is do some myth busting. People believe that PTN finds beds. That's what their role is, and it's not. So before I get into the role of PTN, I'm going to ask you a question. What do you think is one of the largest and busiest emergency departments that we have in the province of British Columbia? Any guesses? Surrey. How many beds do you think Surrey has? So we had anywhere from 50, 100 beds. So I want to let people know that we believe it's us. Why? Because we have over 500 medical beds, 10 flying trauma bays, and a waiting room of almost 1 million square kilometers. And why I say this is simply to make sure that we're talking, again, talking to the health authorities, we're talking about we're on the same page. We have the same concerns. Health authorities are constantly calling us saying, where the heck is the ambulance? When am I going to see the ambulance? Well, in the emergency departments, patients say, when am I going to see the doctor? It's the same thing. We go through the same triage portion. And so how is it possible to run an emergency department with so many people waiting for beds? What does every emergency department have? It's a triage desk and team. So if we are truly the busiest emergency department in the province, how can we do this without a team? So we actually have 2. We have the 911 emergency dispatch. So we have 3 centers across our province. We have Kamloops, Victoria, and Vancouver, where we take 911 calls, we triage them, and we send out the appropriate 911 responses. So if we're doing that for the 911 people across the province, why aren't we doing that for interfacility transfers? We are. So that's what PTN does. PTN is not a bed-finding organization. They're a triage desk for all of BCEHS's triage transfers across the province. So my apologies if you've seen this once, twice, 80 times, but this is a video that we show the health authorities, so I want to share it with those that haven't seen it here, about a journey of a patient from a 911 call to a local facility and then needing to be moved to a larger facility through the use of PTN. What's that, Karen?
What's the phone number you're calling from? I'm going to send you some help. What's the phone number?
604 760
4109.
4109? Okay, tell me exactly what happened.
My
Okay.
husband collapsed on the street corner.
Okay. Are you with him right now?
Yes.
How old is he?
He's 60.
Is he awake?
No.
Is he breathing?
Very funny.
Breathing funny? Like, look at him closely. What is he doing? Coming back.
Like big air.
Listen, I'm sending paramedics to help you.
So we're gonna try this another way. It was supposed to run smooth.
Did this morning.
Yeah, just did this morning. For some reason, now it's not taking.
What's the phone number you're calling from? I'm gonna send you some help. What's the phone number?
Love music. Got it.
Oh boy. 7360 4109.
4109? Okay, tell me exactly what happened.
My
Okay.
husband collapsed on the street corner.
Okay. Are you with him right now?
Yes.
How old is he?
He's 60.
Is he awake?
No.
Is he breathing?
Very funny.
Breathing funny? Like, look at him closely. What is he doing? Coming back.
Like big air.
Listen, I'm sending paramedics to help you, okay?
So that's sending it off to the dispatch center. Things are happening in the background while the call is being
If there's a
triaged.
defibrillator available, send someone to get it now and tell me when you have it, okay?
What is that?
Okay, it's like a shock box for his heart.
Like a device?
Yeah, a device, yeah. Is there something there?
No, you don't want to see it.
Okay, I'm gonna help you, okay? Are you right by it now?
Yeah, please.
Okay, listen carefully, lay him flat on his back on the ground and remove anything from under his head, okay?
No, I can't, he's too heavy for me.
How is he positioned, ma'am?
On tummy.
Okay, it's very important we get him onto his back, okay? We need to get him onto his back so we can help him, okay? So if there's someone there to help you, otherwise we're gonna have to do it, just you and I, okay?
Okay, I'm gonna put you on speaker so I can do it, okay?
Okay, let me know when that's done, okay? Ambulance is on the way.
Okay.
Now they go to the local hospital.
Okay.
You've got him onto his back, okay?
Patient transfer. This is Chelsea. Is your patient's life or organ signal? Yes, this. Okay, may I accept your patient's CHS? Sure, it is 921564632. Okay. And your patient's last name? Smith, S-M-I-T-H. First name? Jason. Date of birth, please. October 10th, 1958. Okay, and where are you calling from? Temple River. Okay. And who's the second physician, please? It's myself, Dr. Ashton. ASHTON? Yep, perfect. I'll just get a case up in here, Dr. Ashton. While we're on the line, is this condition of resolved trauma? No, it's not. Okay, is your patient currently intubated or vented? No, they're not. Does your patient have any known infectious precautions or dialysis needs? No. And where is the patient in Capital Hospital? They're in the emergency. Okay. Okay, what's your patient's diagnosis? It's a study. Okay, Dr. Ashton, let me bring on my critical care paramedic and then I'll bring on the interventional cardiologist from Victoria, okay? Thank you. One moment.
Dispatch, it's Rod.
Oh, hi, Ron. This is Chelsea, DTN.
Hi.
Good morning. I've got Dr. Ashton on the line from Campbell River, hoping to log a new LLTO transfer, please.
Okay.
Sounds like it's steady.
Okay, thank you.
Just want to bring on the interventional cardiologist from Royal Jubilee Hospital.
Great.
Thank you. One moment.
And the sending doctor is still on hold.
Can we do a weather check, Campbell River to Victoria, please?
Copy.
Hello, Jeffrey speaking.
Oh, hello, Bree. Could you check the weather for Campbell River to Victoria, please?
Sure, I can check the weather and I'll give you a call right back.
Royal Jubilee Switchboard. Oh, hi, it's Chelsea with DTN. Okay. Hi, I'm just wondering who your interventional cardiologist is. Dr. Jones. Thank you. Is Dr. Jones today? Okay. And the number for Dr. Jones, please? It's 250-660-1524. Perfect. Thank you very much. Thank you. Bye. Bye.
Hi, Jordan. It's Bria Hellyjet. Cooper just called me about Campbell River to Victoria. Go ahead with the details. Okay, sounds good. We'll just give Victoria a brief, get some fuel, and then we'll give you a call in the air on our way to the airport in Campbell River.
Sending doctor still on hold, frustrated, nothing's happening.
Hello, this is Dr. Jones. Good morning, Dr. Jones. This is Chelsea with the Patient Transfer Network. Oh, hi. Hi, I'm Dr. Ashton calling from Campbell River, hoping to discuss the new LTO transfer with you to study. Okay, great. Perfect. Talk to you in one moment. Hi, Dr. Ashton. Thank you so much for holding. I've got my critical care paramedic Ross on the line in addition to the cardiac physician, Dr. Jones. Thank you.
Good morning, doctor.
Good morning. Good morning, Dr. Jones. Hi, good morning. Good morning. So I have a 60-year-old gentleman who was brought in by ambulance today. He was going to keep illness but after 2 cycles was returned to spontaneous circulation. He's an inferior STEMI. We gave him to him just over 90 minutes ago, and it's failed to work. Okay. Do you have a current set of vitals or any other concerns? Well, he has a new onset of atrial fib. He's on Referral, and there's no anticoagulants. His heart rate was about 160 when he came in. We gave 2 beta blockers. It's now down to about 120. His BP was a little bit high, 160 over 90, and it's now come down to about 137 over 82. But he is satisfied. Okay, we'll take him. We'll bring him directly to the cath lab. Do you know when he's going to arrive? I'm not quite sure.
Hi, you have ambulance here. Yeah, we have checked the weather, and the weather is approved. So our flight time will probably be airborne out of Vancouver in approximately 15 to 20 minutes. Flight time up to Campbell River, I would put us in there around 12:15 to the Campbell River Airport.
Perfect, that's great. And just to confirm everybody, we're going to run this transfer as an LLTO right to the Mount Jubilee cath lab? Yes.
That's correct.
Perfect, I'll send the ticket in right away. Thank you. Thank you very much.
Okay, so there's a couple things to do with that. Now when that helicopter is taking off, because we were part of that conversation, another call comes in to Main Island, one of the Gulf Islands. And we have moments to determine if we need to send that helicopter to the Main Island, the new call, or go to the old call. When the conferences are done outside of BCEHS, and we just have that it's an LLTO, we now have to use our emergency transport physicians or critical care paramedics to call back Campbell River, call Main Island, and have these conversations that take a lot longer than the helicopter getting to Main Island. So by the time it's done and the decision's made, we're probably starting to land in Campbell River. So being part of these conversations up front certainly help determine not only the triage of the call, but again, our use of resources across this entire province. So there's 2 main rules, and as you can see that finding beds were not one of them. We'll talk about in a moment about why Chelsea brought on Royal Jubilee when there are many hospitals between Campbell River and Royal Jubilee, Comox, Nanaimo, Couch, and Victoria General. And so why did we find the bed very quickly? And then of course triaging the transfers for BCEHS. So we're just going to quickly go through the steps of PTN. Sending facility calls PTN. We then bring on a representation, clinical representation. Now it may be, if they've chosen on the phone, an LLTO, they've pressed 1, we'll bring on a critical care paramedic or an emergency transport physician. If they press for a higher level of care, we'll bring on a clinical triage nurse to the call. We then contact the sending site or the receiving site and facilitate a conference. Now the receiving site, how we contact them is we just don't find beds and keep going until the receiving site accepts. We do it on a very defined referral pattern that is given to us by all health authorities in the province. Each health authority has a referral pattern. And in fact, over these last few months, the work that we're doing, they're going back into their referral patterns and redefining them, even closer to the ground level, whether it's pediatric, ortho, whatever the case may be. But in this case, you'll see that if we look at the bottom one, an example, JKL Hospital, normally feeds into the closest appropriate hospital, PQR, if they have the services that are required. If not, we look at STU, and if not, we look at XYZ. How we know the services is based on the hospital services spreadsheets. So we know each hospital across the province what service they have, and the idea is keeping the patient closest to home with the services that can be provided. So for example, in this case, JKL would phone PTN and say they have a patient with burns. We know in the referral pattern that only XYZ, so PQR, STU, doesn't have burns as a service, XYZ does, and so we immediately contact JKL with XYZ. Just like Chelsea on the video, connected Campbell River to Royal Jubilee. You'll also notice that in the same health authority, DEF has burns. So a lot of times we have conferences that happen outside of us, where the physicians have called DEF directly and say, I have a patient with burns, and they accept the patient, and then they call PTN. The health authority has told us that these patients go to XYZ. The physician is now telling us these patients go to DEF, and that's where the concerns start to mount. So we'll talk about the work that we're doing with the health authorities at the end of this, but it's certainly one of the concerns within PTN. We don't control where the patient goes to. We follow the referral patterns. You're probably aware of the East Kootenay area. We have challenges where, rightly so, physicians want their patients going to Alberta. The health authority is telling PTN to send them to the interior, and we're sort of the ones that are stuck in the middle. So it's during the conference, of course, that we're able to triage the transfers and look at competing priorities across the province. We then have to, after we get off the phone, we contact the receiving hospital through Access and let them know that we've had this call, the conference was done, and this is what was determined, whether it was LLTO, whether it was a higher level of care in a time frame given, and we asked the hospital for a bed. Every health authority across our province has a non-refusal policy for LLTOs. Do they refuse? Yes, they do. We also have all of our higher level cares that don't have policies to non-refusal. So we have to wait for Access to phone us and give us a bed. And we wait. So on a random day, we did this slide. We had 92 patients in the province that already had the physician-to-physician conference and now are waiting for beds. I'll show you what this means to us in the air ambulance side of the world. But even on the physician and the local ground crew side of the world, we look at places like Salisbury. The physicians just had a conference with Victoria General. They hang up the phone, the physician of Victoria General has accepted with a 4, 8, 12-hour time frame. We now phone Victoria General and they say, okay, you're gonna have to give us some time. We don't have a bed, we'll call you back when we have a bed. So we wait. We also have pressure from the health authority because we should be telling them that we're waiting, but we're actually waiting for the health authority. So it's something that we're working on that communication, that this is Access and that needs to be talking to the sending sites. We're simply waiting for a bed with that time frame that's given. Once that the hospital offers us a bed, we can then move the patient. So this is, again, really big on Salisbury or on the Gulf Islands. The doctors have that talk. They hang up the phone, they turn to their nursing staff and say the ambulance should be here momentarily. 6 hours later, our crew walks through the door and the doctor says, oh, you guys must have been busy. And they say, what do you mean? We've been sitting in quarters this whole time. And so they blame PTN that we're holding the calls and not dispatching in a timely manner. But there's that confusion that this is what we're actually waiting for. So again, once bed's offered, we move it to the ambulance side of the house. So I won't bother going through the recap, but the challenges that we face are, again, the conferences outside of PTN. One of the things we've heard loud and clear across this province from sending physicians, get us back to our patients, get us off these phone calls, and get us back to the patients. But what's happening is some of these physicians are making phone calls to the receiving sites. They're making all the phone calls that PTN would be, and then calling PTN and having to repeat that story all over again. We're asking for physicians from sending sites to call us before calling the receiving site. Let us do what we did here in the video. Have Chelsea just listen in with our critical care paramedic or our emergency transport physician listen in, and then make a decision as a team to what that patient needs. A lot of questions about advice calls. Well, what if I'm just calling advice? And 30 minutes later, that advice call turns into a transfer. Now we have to repeat the story again. We take advice calls, and if they don't turn up to be transfers, we'll cancel them. But it's best to do this all at one time and get the physicians back to their patients. Physicians not wanting their patients to go to facilities that are not in their referral pattern. Again, places like Alberta wanting to send Alberta residents to Alberta. The challenge we face, because sometimes we don't control that. Rapid or Alberta will say no, we're not taking the higher level cares. They do take LLTOs as non-refusal, but the health authorities asked us to keep these patients within BC. Yesterday I spent half the day looking at a couple calls that went wrong in the interior. They were LLTOs, and why didn't they go to Alberta? The first note that was in the call was the physician asked us directly to speak to Kelowna General, so we connected them. And then the health authority is asking why we didn't send these to Alberta. So we're having troubles following whether we're following the sending physician's direction or the health authority's direction. There's one concern that I can talk about in all the health authorities, and again, I'll show you how this relates to air ambulance, is waiting for beds. This is probably the biggest thing. We have physicians giving 8 to 12, 24-hour time frames, non-STEMIs, and yet 24 hours goes by and there's still no bed. So now we reconference. We spend all this time again. We offer the reconference, we ask them if they want to extend the time, and yes, they'll extend it for another, this patient's still stable, we'll extend it for another 24, we'll extend it for another 24, we'll extend it for another 24. So if what we're working on within the health authorities is we need to reduce the wait for bed times. And then of course, as I say, overcapacity, non-refusal, yes, hospitals refuse all the time. And we're sort of stuck in the middle because there is a very lack of escalation inside the health authorities, especially after hours. They don't know who to call, and this is certainly not a concern of BCEHS, more of a health authority concern, but we're working with them to make sure we can help wherever possible. Finally, we have bed acceptance, and once that happens, it goes over to the ambulance side of the house. So the ambulance side of the house, PTCC, Patient Transport Coordination Center. Here we have direct control of 10 of our assets across the province. 4 of our rotary helicopters, 2 which are in Vancouver, 1 in Prince Rupert, and 1 in Kamloops. We have a jet in Vancouver. We have a turbo in Vancouver, and we have 2 turbos in Kelowna, 1 in Prince George, and 1 in Fort St. John. So when I asked the health authorities, we have 10 aircraft covering almost 1 million square kilometers. It's the first question I always get asked. Why the heck don't you have more aircraft? I was in Prince George, and they asked, this was one of the first questions they asked. As we know in the north, we don't have as many resources that we possibly should, or should we be more efficient? So, as we talked about that random day in September, 92 patients waiting for beds across our province. Our dispatchers in PTCC are working on about 20 to 25 puzzle pieces each day, trying to put together the plane's journey. So I've got a Fort St. John coming to Vancouver, I've got a Terrace coming to Vancouver, I've got a Cranbrook going to Kelowna, and these are the puzzle pieces they're working with. They're missing about 92 puzzle pieces that they could be working with to help complete those journeys. So when I was in Prince George, they asked about the aircraft. I said, well, our plane in Fort St. John, when it first started, flew 140,000 miles in the first 6 months. 70,000 were empty. And in fact, right now, that plane is overhead of us in Prince George, heading to Terrace empty from Fort St. John to pick up a patient to bring down to Vancouver, picking up a patient in Vancouver and going to Dawson Creek. So the journey from Terrace to Vancouver, Vancouver to Dawson is great. But we lost that edge of flying all the way across the province empty. There are 3 patients right now sitting in Prince George, 2 bound for Smithers and 1 bound for Terrace. We're not able to take them because there's no beds. So we ask, and no, we can't take them. We fly all the way there, and 3 hours later, 6 hours later, 9 hours later, beds become available. And now they're asking us to do those missions all over again. So on this day, we did a Prince George to Terrace, no bed. Vancouver to St. John's, we flew empty. We flew from Vancouver to Kelowna empty, and many, many more. All of these had flight patients we could have put on our flights. And of course, what happens is the next day, they're ready to go. And now this adds to our bucket of the ones that are ready to go, and now we don't have aircraft to do those. So we are working very closely with the health authority to fix this problem, to give us more efficiency with the air ambulance world, and whether or not that will give, then we'll have to determine whether the air resources that we need and where we need them. So we do spend some time talking about crew qualifications. This is a big one when it comes to our nurse escort slide. We go down about our PCPs, advanced life support, critical care, and infant transport teams. You know them here. We talk about the scope of practice and treatment guidelines. One of the things that we're working on with the health authorities is they're asking about when do I need a nurse escort? What can PCP take, and when do I need a nurse escort? So we're working off the transfer matrix to give the health authorities a sheet that they can have in every facility across the province. They can look at it and say, if you're running this, I'll need a nurse escort. This is when I need a nurse escort. This is when PCP can do it, or this is when I need an alternate service provider. So how we choose the resources. Now, this is a challenging one again. Basically, obviously, if it needs an infant transport team, critical care, remote locations, we fly. The one area that we are looking at and working on is the length. So anything right now over 5 hours, we look at flying. Anything under 5 hours, we look at possibly driving. Doesn't mean we have to drive, doesn't mean we have to fly, but those are the first stipulations that we look at. When we actually look at our province, there is really not a lot of places that are 3 to 4 hours. It's either way under 3 hours or over 5 hours for the drive. So we are looking at, can we decrease that number and look at flying more patients? Like I said, when I was in Prince Rupert, there's an area, Kincolith, Greenville, New Ange. It's our closest ambulance station to Kincolith is about 3 hours from Terrace to Kincolith, 3 hours back. Our Prince Rupert helicopter is about 20 minutes out, and so we're looking at flying more instead of driving. So these are some of the changes that we are making. Now, of course, a lot of the hospitals across the province and IMO, others, phone and say, I need a helicopter. Helicopters and fixed wings aren't always the fastest way, so we have to, it's a hard one to say to the health authorities, but it is BCEHS's choice on the logistics and the resources that we use. People, we don't have hospitals phoning and saying, I want the helicopter, I want this. It is, we will give you the best and fastest mode of transportation based on the patient's acuity and the ETP, emergency transport physician's assessment. So we do have our regional dispatch centers, of course, one in Kamloops, one in Victoria, one in Vancouver. So they're responsible for dispatching the ground ambulances and if they have a nurse escort. Anything again, ITT, CCT, HART, all stays inside the PTCC, Patient Transport Coordination Center. But the other ground transfers go up to the regional centers, and it's those ground centers that are contacting the health authorities directly, the sending and receiving facilities, to work with them on ETAs. If they deteriorate and looking at now moving up into an LLTO category or looking at needing air or going to a different destination, we'll bring back PTN and PTCC into the mix, but it goes off to the regional dispatch centers to take care of and be in contact with the facilities. Getting the patient in the aircraft, a lot of our health authority partners believe that we pull the back of the ambulance up and we put them on a conveyor belt and push them into the WestJet, and away we go. And why can't we take 2 more patients when we're there? So I know most of you have probably seen this video. So we're going to play one more video of just loading the aircraft. So this, again, it's for the health authorities to see. I let them know that this is actually filmed in a hangar in Vancouver. Think about this as you're watching the video. If this is in the middle of the night during the blizzard in Fort St. John on the tarmac, it's not the same way. So hopefully this time the video will work. Seen this video up? talked to the health authority about the importance of measuring patients correctly. We have a lot of challenges with health authorities measuring them. And so letting them know that the door of this plane is 27 inches wide. And if the patient doesn't fit, they don't fit.
Robert. One more. Okay, we're all the way in. We should right there.
Now that we're loaded and ready for takeoff, as you can appreciate, there's some other occupational and operational aspects that are challenging for this environment. During takeoff and ascent, we have to be seated and belted in the upward position, which limits our access to the patient, both to monitor for alarms, as well as to mitigate any complications on the patient's left side as they're up against the bulkhead of the aircraft, as well as their head for any problems with the airway. Part of our role is to anticipate for these limitations and create some kind of buffer to prevent from misadventure, either from clinical deterioration or therapeutic misadventure. With those things in mind, our patients are exposed to all the caveats of altitude medicine that you would be outside of an aircraft, so cold temperature, high noise, high vibration, and low humidity. And so we have to factor those things in because we can no longer auscultate our patient's chest. We may not be able to hear the auditory alarm to our LTV ventilator, to our pumps, and to our monitors. And so we have to try to configure ourselves and create buffers for the patients so that we have an ability to anticipate or mitigate these issues in flight, and especially during the vulnerable periods such as takeoff, landing, and during severe turbulence.
So one of the other challenges that we face is our equipment is stowed in the tail section of the plane, and so therefore very difficult to access during flight if we were required to do any resuscitation that required access to that equipment. So we have to anticipate any of those needs and make sure that that equipment is available and stowed up front so that we can have access it in a timely manner should we need it.
So we hope you can appreciate that our diagnostic and therapeutic capabilities in the aircraft are quite unique. And as we like to summarize it, the air medical evacuation setting is at best unpredictable and at worst unforgiving. So that's why our crews spend the time that we do preparing our patients as we do to buffer from the environment in which we work.
So, next topic, very sensitive one. This one I tend to move around a lot because when I'm with the health authority, so they don't get a clear shot. Medical escorts is one of the topics, of course, across the entire province. What I start with this one is BCEHS recognizes the fact that we want to make sure we keep our physicians and nurses inside our facilities wherever possible across this province. We are not trying to keep our crews in quarters and use your resources. So, challenge being this map of our province. Our circles here shows our ALS communities. So our advanced life support, one in Prince George, one in Kamloops, one in Kelowna, and one in Nanaimo. Stars indicate the areas where we have multiple ALS in those areas, Victoria and Vancouver, of course. But if you look at Northern Health, It's one single dot. Now, of course, the challenge is Northern Health is a fairly far distance when we're talking cardiac patients that are moving to Vancouver. So when we fly those distances, there are a lot of times that we need the nurse escorts to bring patients out to our aircraft. And I apologize again to the health authorities, because I know in PTCC it almost sounds like a hostage negotiation. If you don't send the nurse out, we're not coming. And it's actually a true point. It could be probably said a little better. But what it certainly means is we can't come because we're limitations. Again, during the winter time, it might be because it's a day-only airport and we're gonna run out of daylight. And we only have 30 minutes on the ground and we have to be back up again. It could be because of de-icing capabilities. It could be because of crews timing out or pilots timing out. So we're working with the health authorities to do everything we can, including we're training our PCPs to do cardiac monitoring for short distances so they can bring them out to the aircraft and again, take away some of those pressures from the nursing staff having to send them out. But when we do need to, that's the communication that we have to have, open communication with the nursing physician staff in those sending facilities to let them know this is what's needed to make that transfer happen. If we can't, then fair be it. Then we may have to wait until the morning or later on in the night to make those transfers happen. But as it stands right now, unless they're able to do this for us, we're going to have to turn down this mission. It also, as you know, a lot of our airports are great distances from our hospital, 20, 30, 40 minutes away. So again, impacts how many resources we have flying if our crews are getting out of our aircraft, driving to hospitals, loading patients and driving back. Well, aircraft, very limited aircraft, are sitting on the tarmacs for hours at a time. So again, trying to work with the health authorities on how we can do business better. On the same token, I asked the health authorities that as much as we want to keep your nurses and physicians in your communities, we need to keep our paramedics in our communities as well. And by doing so, we need to look at alternate methods of moving patients of low acuity nature, such as taxis, commercial airlines, handy-dart, etc. If they don't require paramedics, then we should be looking at other reasons to move these patients. So going forward, we do talk a little bit about the education that we're looking at with PCP to again alleviate the concerns on the nurse escorts. We let the health authorities know we're looking at deployment models for both air and ground. We're going across the province. We've done added extra resources into Nanaimo, Kamloops, Kelowna. We've added the Fort St. John plane, and so we're doing studies, evidence-based, on where we can add resources. The clinical response model, we certainly talk about that because again, we want to make sure that people understand the same ambulances that are doing the 911 call are doing those transfers. And we want to make sure that we're triaging these transfers correctly because we could be bumping 911 calls. In May of this last year, we went live with what's called the clinical response model. Before this time, all of our 911 calls were letter designate, so our highest level was an echo response, our cardiac arrest. When the dispatcher, who of course dispatches transfers and emergency calls, gets two calls put in front of them, one's a transfer and it's called a yellow, and one's a 911 call and it's called a delta, they don't know which one to dispatch first. So again, we realigned the 911 side of the house so that they're all colors, whether they're transfers or whether they're 911 calls. They're a color coordinated triage method, purple, red, orange, yellow, green, blue. And so the dispatcher now knows that this transfer can go ahead of this 911 call, but we need to make sure that we're actually triaging 100% correctly. The community paramedics are probably all familiar, I'll just skip over that. The online dashboard. I'm really happy to say that last week we went live in all of our dispatch centers for the first time ever, an online dashboard where health authorities will have the ability to log onto a website and check their patient's journey from the time that they called PTN to the time the conference was done to the time that the bed was offered, so the physicians can look and say, oh, we're still waiting on a bed. Or once the bed's offered, now it's over with ambulance, what time the ambulance is on the way, what time they've arrived at the sending facility so the receiving facility can see they're in Fort St. John, they should be on the way here, be here in a couple hours. And so we're just doing our testing right now, the platform's built. It's just a matter of making sure everything works fine in the dispatch centers. We're going to go live with a few facilities at each health authority to do a test probably within the next 4 weeks. And I would imagine in probably about 8 weeks that every healthcare worker across the province will have access to this. The last thing I want to talk about is the Provincial Patient Transfer Service Advisory Committee. So last year, at this February of last year, was our first meeting of this provincial group. A couple months before that, I was struggling with all the things that were happening in PTN, all the different policies, all the different procedures, the concerns that were pointed in our direction that were not moving patients correctly. So I invited all the health authority executives to come to our house, to BCEHS, so executives from every health authority, including First Nation, a representative from Patient Voices, the Ministry of Health sits at the table, and PHSA with BC Women's and Children's. And we're looking at tearing down the way we move patients across the province. Instead of having a BCEHS transfer module or a health authority module, it is a provincial module. And it's not just BCEHS. We have areas where we need help as far as our auto launch, our early fixed wing launch. These are BCEHS policies. We want to make these provincial policies because there's an aspect when early fixed wing, for example, when our crews get to Fort St. John and the patient's in Fort St. John, who calls Vancouver General? Who is the one that gives a notification? Who does the clinical handover? There's a responsibility of the health authorities that they need to take part of as well. And so we need to work with them to create a provincial early fixed wing launch and a provincial auto launch system. As well as I've got 5 different LLTO policies, non-refusal policies from different health authorities that have different meanings and different reads that we need to combine into one provincial non-refusal LLTO policy. So there's work that we're doing on that. We've signed off quite a few of these policies in the provincial format. This one's a nursing handover. What that means is we in PTN have nurses that were at one point giving the receiving call a heads up and giving the clinical handover. Part of the nursing licensing and part of the up-to-date information is making sure that clinical handover comes from the sending site nurse. So it was determined that it's the responsibility of the sending site nurse to have that follow up with the receiving site nurse when the ambulance is picking up the patient. So we created the procedure and policy on that, as well as a policy on the roles and responsibilities of PTN, which I've just shared with you here, and the roles and responsibilities of the health authority, and signed off by every health authority. We are looking at sending out as a practice update, so every doctor, nurse, paramedic, dispatcher across the province gets the same information. So the same early fixed wing launch. So it's not a BCEHS update, it's a provincial update.